Hello, my name's Orville. I'm 76, a retired postmaster, and a father, though some days, I wonder if my own son even sees me that way anymore. He told the town council I was losing my mind, said I wasn't fit to handle my own affairs, but while he smiled in public, he was forging my name, emptying my accounts, planning to ship me off and take everything I had. He thought I was too old, too slow to notice, but I wasn't. And now I wonder, how did a son become the kind of man who'd destroy his father just to get ahead? Was it something I did, or something I didn't do? You think you know your family, until they try to erase you. Garrett's new house sat in a neighborhood that looked like it belonged in a commercial for retirement accounts and luxury SUVs. Clean sidewalks, pristine lawns, and every third driveway had a Tesla. I parked my 10-year-old Chevy by the curb, feeling like an antique trying to pass for relevant. When I rang the bell, Callista opened the door with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Orville," she said, stepping aside. "Come in." Her voice was polite, but distant, like I was a visiting salesman rather than her husband's father. Inside, the smell of rosemary chicken filled the air. The walls were freshly painted, modern grays and whites, and just beside the kitchen, a new family portrait hung. Garrett, Callista, and Micah, beaming at the beach. No trace of me. That stung, but I let it slide. Garrett greeted me with a limp handshake. No hug, no warmth. Just, "Glad you made it, Dad." He turned and walked back to the kitchen. I followed, slower now, unsure of what tonight would bring. Dinner started out normal enough. We talked about the weather. Garrett joked about the Seahawks' chances this season. Callista chimed in with something about the school board. I nodded, tried to smile, but something was off. Their words felt rehearsed, like actors reading lines in a play I hadn't auditioned for. I brought up a side table I'd built from reclaimed oak. "Used some old tools from your granddad's shed. Still works like a charm," I said. Garrett didn't even look up. Must have been a slow week at the hardware store. I laughed, soft and unsure. "It's not much, but it keeps me moving." "Right," he said, slicing his chicken. "Handing out carts to strangers. Real purpose-driven stuff." The table went quiet. Micah glanced at me, then back to his plate. I caught the flicker of discomfort in his eyes. He'd heard things kids shouldn't have to overhear. Callista placed her fork down with precision. "We've all got responsibilities. Orville, everyone should pull their weight." Garrett leaned forward, elbows on the table like he was delivering a lecture. "It's cute that you hand out carts at 67, but honestly, you're coasting." I said nothing. I'd learned silence was better than shouting, better than saying something you'd regret, or worse, something they'd twist against you. Their friends, Ben and Dana, from down the street, sat stiffly, pretending to be absorbed in their wine glasses. Then Garrett hit me with it. No warning, no softening of the blow. "You've had a free ride long enough. Get a job and stop being a leech." The word hung in the air like smoke. A leech. That's what he saw when he looked at me. Even Callista looked surprised. Not horrified, just surprised he'd said it out loud. I wanted to remind him of the years I worked 2 jobs so he could go to college debt-free. Of the time I sold my truck so he and Callista could cover the down payment for this very house. But I didn't. I just sat there, feeling like I'd stepped into a stranger's home by mistake. "I see," I finally said. Garrett shrugged. "It's just time, Dad, time you contributed. Time you stopped living like someone else owes you." I stood, slow and deliberate. "Excuse me," I said, and walked toward the bathroom, passing the hallway filled with framed photos, all of them Garrett's world. I was nowhere in it. Inside the bathroom, I stared at myself. The mirror was too clean, my face too tired. "When did I become invisible?" I whispered. I could feel the weight of every missed moment, every time I'd swallowed pride for peace. Not tonight. I took a deep breath, adjusted my collar, and walked back to the table. No one said a word. They just looked up, waiting. "You're right," I said. "Maybe it's time I start pulling my weight." Callista furrowed her brow. What does that mean? I smiled, just enough to make them uneasy. You'll find out soon enough. I didn't slam the door when I left Garrett's house. I just closed it gently, like I didn't want the house to feel it. But inside me, something had cracked wide open. The air outside was cool, crisp with pine and late summer. I paused on the front steps for a beat longer than I should have, glancing sideways at the shiny new SUV parked just inches from the curb. I knew that car. I had written the check that covered half the down payment. Garrett called it an early inheritance. Funny how fast that turned into a debt I apparently still hadn't paid. I walked to my car without a word, the sounds of laughter trailing behind me from the dining room window. I could still hear Callista's high-pitched laugh, the fake one she used for neighbors and Instagram stories. Not once had anyone asked me to stay for dessert. I wasn't even offered coffee. The drive home was quiet. No radio, no thoughts I wanted to entertain. My knuckles clenched the steering wheel tighter than necessary. But I didn't loosen my grip. Every red light seemed to last forever. My mind wandered to something I'd nearly buried. 2 weeks ago, the 4th of July. I hadn't been invited. I found out about the BBQ from Bonnie, the neighbor across the street. She'd brought over some leftover ribs and casually mentioned how lovely Garrett's party had been. Your son really knows how to host, she'd said. The fireworks were spectacular. My stomach twisted then, just as it did now. I remembered calling Garrett the next day, trying to sound casual. Heard you threw quite the shindig, I said. He paused, just a second too long. Oh, yeah, last-minute thing. You know how it is. Meant to call. And then, like a slap across the face, I remembered what Micah had said when I picked him up from school a few days later. Mom said the barbecue was more fun without Gramps around. I didn't say anything to him. I just changed the subject, but it stuck to my ribs like cold grease. That night, sitting alone at the edge of my bed, I realized this didn't start tonight. It wasn't the dinner. It wasn't the insult. This had been building, quietly, systematically. I was being erased. That house, the one they sat in tonight so proudly, laughing like they built it on dreams and hard work, that house wouldn't exist if it weren't for me, and not in the abstract you raised him kind of way. I mean literally. Celestine and I had mortgaged our retirement cabin to help Garrett qualify for the loan. I still remember the splinters in my palms from building that back deck. Garrett was still learning how to use a level properly. I showed him. Measure twice, cut once, I'd said. A good house starts with a strong foundation. So does a family. He laughed, back then, called me old school, but he listened. Now, I doubt he even remembers that. What really hit me was a Facebook post from last week. Callista had uploaded a photo album titled, How We Built Our Dream Home. Every picture showed Garrett in a hard hat, holding blueprints, directing some contractor like a man with a vision. Not a single photo of me, not even a mention. The captions credited her father with advice and emotional support. I sat there for an hour staring at the screen. No likes, no comments, just silence. My hand hovered over the like button, but I couldn't bring myself to press it. It wasn't about pride. It was about disappearance. I didn't want applause. I just didn't want to be airbrushed out of the picture like I was some smudge on the edge of a lens. That was the night I started pulling out the old files, receipts, deeds, photos of me with Garrett on the porch, both of us holding hammers, blueprints with my initials scrawled in the corner. I laid them all out across the kitchen table like puzzle pieces. I opened a box labeled insurance. Another one marked contingency. I didn't know exactly what I was planning yet, but I knew it started with remembering. Not just memories, but proof, paper trails, signatures, commitments. I'd spent decades locking things away, documents, emotions, boundaries. That ended now. Late into the night, I sat under the dim light of the dining room lamp, tracing my name on an old blueprint. Designed by Orville Trask, 1999. My hands trembled, but not from age. You may have built over me, I muttered, voice barely above a whisper, but I've still got the plans. I woke up at 5:30 a.m., same as always. Not because I had anywhere to be. Those days were long gone. But because my body hadn't gotten the memo, Retirement doesn't switch off decades of routine. The room was still dark, the early gray of dawn barely seeping through the blinds. I sat on the edge of the bed for a moment, rubbing the arthritis from my knees before I stood. The kitchen welcomed me with its familiar creaks, floorboards that had groaned under my feet for over 30 years. I'd meant to fix them, always said I would, never did. They sounded louder now that the house was so quiet. I filled the old coffee pot, clicked it on, and stood watching it bubble and hiss. No TV, no radio. I wanted the silence. It wasn't empty, it was honest. And sometimes, silence tells you what love won't. I sat at the table with my coffee and pulled out my leather notebook. The spine was cracked, pages curled, ink faded in some spots. I called it my account of absences, not a diary, just a log of the things people didn't say, the things they chose not to invite me to, not to ask about, the omissions that stack up over time, like missed nails in a frame. Eventually, the whole thing collapses. I flipped back to a page I wrote 6 months ago. That day was still sharp in my mind. I had just come in from trimming the hedges when my phone buzzed, a notification from the bank. Transfer completed, $8, $1,000, withdrawn. My chest tightened. It was from the joint account Celestine and I opened years ago. I kept it open for emergencies. That was the whole point. Garrett had access, just in case something urgent came up, but no one had called. No one had asked. I phoned Garrett. He picked up after the 4th ring, sounding like I'd caught him mid-sentence. "Oh yeah, Dad," he said like we were in the middle of a conversation. "I meant to call you. We had to put a contractor's bid down on the roof, time-sensitive. Didn't want to lose him." Time-sensitive. My jaw clenched, but I kept calm. "And you couldn't call me first?" He chuckled nervously. "You always said I should be decisive." I didn't laugh, and I didn't push. I just hung up and stared at the bank notification again. Later that evening, I brought it up to Celestine. She looked up from her crossword and said, "I talked to Garrett. He said it's taken care of." "Taken care of," she said, like it was a dry cleaning bill, like my name wasn't still on the account. That night, I changed the password. Didn't tell anyone. Just wrote it down in my notebook and went to bed with a feeling I hadn't had since boot camp, like I was sleeping with my back to the wall. A week later, I ran into Paul Jenkins at the hardware store. Paul and I had known each other since '75, worked side by side on more than one foundation. He was leaning over the lawnmower display when he spotted me. "Orville, hey, you know your boy Garrett called me up last month. Said he needed help with some roofing quotes. Told him I'd swing by. Never heard back." I blinked. "What day was that?" He scratched his beard. "Late May. Right after Memorial Day." That was weeks before the $8, $1,000 transfer. My stomach dropped. I thanked Paul, paid for my wood glue, and walked out without saying another word. No contractor, no urgency, just another smooth-talking lie packaged as family need. This morning, remembering all that, I walked out to the garage. Dust motes floated in the cold shaft of sunlight coming through the side window. I pulled open the cabinet labeled MISC. It was a catch-all of old life, yellowed receipts, letters from banks, my pension statements, even a crumpled napkin where Celestine once wrote me a lunch note. I sat on the old metal stool and flipped through the pages like a man looking for evidence. There it was, all of it. Deposits into Garrett's college fund, copies of co-signed loans, insurance premiums paid just this once. A stack of giving, with no bottom. "They didn't just take money," I whispered. "They took the name off the door and pretended I never held the hammer." I pulled out 2 boxes and started sorting, one labeled "Given Willingly," the other, "Taken Without Asking." I wasn't angry. Not like last night. It felt surgical, like cauterizing a wound so it doesn't fester. I refilled my coffee. This time, no shaking in my hand. I wrote 3 names on a blank page, a lawyer I hadn't spoken to in 5 years, my old financial planner, and someone I hadn't thought about in over a decade. Before closing the notebook, I underlined a sentence I'd written weeks ago but never fully understood until now. If they want to forget who I am, I'll remind them what I built. Back inside the house, I pulled a manila envelope from the file drawer. Its flap was torn from age. Written in my hand, right on the tab, Family Trust, Revocable. At 5:45 p.m., I sat in my truck parked 1 block down from Garrett's house. The engine idled low, radio off, my hands resting on the folder that lay across my lap. I'd sent a text earlier, short, simple. We need to talk. I'll be by at 6. No response. Just the little check marks letting me know it was delivered. That was enough. I pulled into their driveway 5 minutes early. The sun hung low, washing the siding in gold, but it didn't warm me. I took a deep breath, buttoned the collar of my blue flannel, and picked up the folder. No accusations tonight. Just facts. I wasn't there to argue. I was there to be heard. When Garrett opened the door, he didn't bother with a hello, just leaned one hand on the doorframe and said, "Didn't expect you to actually come." I said I would, I replied. "You got a minute?" He stepped aside reluctantly, his expression stiff. From the kitchen, Callista glanced over her shoulder, arms crossed, lips tight. Her body said more than words ever could. I walked in and sat at the dining table like I had hundreds of times before, though tonight felt like walking into someone else's home. Garrett hovered, unsure if he wanted to sit or pace. Callista remained by the sink, drying a dish that looked already dry. "I brought something," I said, laying the folder on the table. I wanted to clear the air, not with blame, just clarity. Garrett sighed. "Dad, if this is about money again, it's about everything," I said gently. "But let's start there." I opened the folder and slid out a few pages, printouts, handwritten notes, old check stubs. "This is a record of the last 10 years, tuition for the kids, the loan for your HVAC startup, the down payment for this house. I'm not waving it like a bill. I just need you to know, really know, what's been given." Garrett's brow furrowed. "Are you saying we owe you? Is that what this is?" "No," I said, voice steady. "I'm saying you've taken a lot, and I've given it, mostly without question, but the asking stopped somewhere along the way. And that matters," Callista finally spoke, still not turning fully toward me. "You always do this. Guilt us. Make everything about your sacrifices. I'm not looking for guilt. I'm asking for boundaries." I leaned in. "If you keep taking without asking, the well will run dry." Garrett scoffed, pushing away from the table. "This again, we've heard this before." "No," I said. "You've deflected this before." I paused, letting the air hang heavy before continuing. "I need you both to understand. If this pattern doesn't change, I'll have no choice but to make changes myself, to the trust, and to how involved I am in this household." Callista spun around, her voice sharp. "You're manipulating us. Again, using money to control the family." I looked straight at her. "You don't get to rewrite history and then blame me for remembering it." Silence. "The kind that makes the refrigerator hum sound like thunder." Garrett smirked, shaking his head. "You can't touch the trust. It's locked up. You signed it over years ago." I reached into the folder and slid out a photocopy. The legal stamp still visible in the corner. "This is the original document. It's revocable. I retained full discretionary power." Garrett's face dropped. Callista's dish clinked into the sink, forgotten. "You confused generosity with obligation," I said. "That's your mistake." Callista narrowed her eyes. "Then do what you have to do. You've been a ghost anyway." Her words hit harder than I let on, but something inside me snapped into place. I saw it all clearly now, not just their entitlement, but their complete absence of gratitude. I had spent years giving pieces of myself away like loose change in a church tray. I stood, folder in hand. "This isn't war. It's a warning, a chance to course correct." Garrett crossed his arms. "We don't owe you anything, and I'm not asking for anything back," I said calmly. "But the next time I come here, it won't be with papers. It'll be with decisions." As I turned for the door, Callista leaned in and whispered something to Garrett I couldn't hear, but I didn't need to. The way they stood, side by side, smug and impenetrable, told me they hadn't heard a word I'd said. The door closed behind me harder than necessary. Not slammed, just firm. Final. At home. I went straight to the safe in my study. I placed the folder inside, turned the key, and spun the dial. On the bookshelf sat the old landline phone with the flashing red light. One unheard voicemail. I pressed play. It was Celestine's voice. Months old, tinny and distant. Maybe one day, they'll learn. The sun hadn't fully broken through the clouds that morning. I was already at the community garden by 7, hands deep in damp soil, pulling weeds around the tomato beds. That place had become my sanctuary since retiring, a patch of dirt that didn't talk back or take me for granted. I found peace in the silence, the kind that doesn't expect you to be anything but present. But even peace has a curfew. I heard the tires before I saw the car, that low hum of entitlement. Callista's silver SUV pulled up and parked just outside the gate. No text, no call, just her, stepping out like she owned the ground she walked on. She wore sunglasses despite the overcast sky, and the smile she offered wasn't a smile at all, more like a warning. I stood up slowly, dusted my knees off, and took off my gloves. My pulse didn't quicken, but I could feel the tension simmering beneath the surface. She walked straight toward me, stopping just shy of my personal space. "So this is what you've been doing with your time," she said, glancing around like the place offended her. "Growing tomatoes while Garrett loses sleep over your threats." I didn't answer right away. I leaned on the handle of my spade and looked her dead in the face. "You didn't come here to admire the basil, so let's get to it." She took off her sunglasses with a theatrical sigh. "You really think cutting the money is going to make us respect you? You're just trying to control Garrett the same way you controlled your late wife, with guilt and money." That hit like a low punch. I kept my posture steady. "I was there. Orville," she pressed on. "You missed his football games. Remember? Too busy. Always working. You threw money at birthdays and called it parenting. Now you want appreciation. You don't get to ask for love after buying silence for years." I looked down, then back at her. "Funny thing about silence. It teaches you more than noise ever does." She narrowed her eyes. "You gave us money, not love. Now you want both, and it's too damn late." I exhaled slowly. "You've twisted a lot of truth into something convenient. I made mistakes, sure, but don't confuse presence with submission. I'm here now, not to argue, but to draw a line." Her tone turned ice cold. "If this is some kind of power game, you'll lose. You're old, alone, replaceable." I felt the jab, but I didn't flinch. I just nodded. "Replaceable by who? The man who couldn't manage a contractor deposit without lying about it?" That froze her for half a breath. "You can paint me however you want, Callista, but what you're doing isn't family. It's freeloading with entitlement." She scoffed, turned, and walked back to the car without another word. The gravel crunched under her heels like punctuation. I didn't watch her drive off. I just turned back to my bed of soil, pushed the spade into the earth, and exhaled. By late morning, I was back home. The documents were laid out neatly on the dining table, trust forms, the living will, and notes from my attorney. I sat there with a pen in hand and a spine full of resolve. I didn't feel small. I didn't feel vengeful. I felt right. 40 years of work built that portfolio. My name, my sweat, my hours in the dead of winter doing double shifts just so Garrett could have shoes that weren't hand-me-downs. And somehow that turned into a debt I owed them? Not anymore. I picked up my journal and started writing. I didn't work for 4 decades so someone else could weaponize my kindness. That same afternoon, I called the bank and canceled the monthly transfer to Garrett's joint account. No hesitation, no second guessing. I then scheduled a meeting with my lawyer for Monday to start the process of updating beneficiaries. I penned a letter too, one meant for after I'm gone, not to be sent. Just something that held my truth, unfiltered. I ended it with a quote that had followed me for years but never rang so true until now. "No one can make you feel inferior without your consent." I signed my name under it like a man reclaiming his own spine. Later that evening, I called Garrett. He picked up after 2 rings. "I've separated the accounts," I said plainly. There was silence, Then, Dad, what the hell is this? I'll always be your father, Garrett, but I won't be your lifeline anymore. Not like this. You're overreacting. This isn't about overreacting. It's about self-respect. I hope you find peace, just not at the expense of mine. And with that, I hung up. My hands were steady. The next morning, I got a group text from Callista. Family brunch next Sunday, RSVP. I stared at it and chuckled dryly. Family. That word didn't mean what it used to, not in their house. I pulled up to Garrett's house that Sunday with a small bottle of red in hand and knots in my stomach. I'd picked out a clean shirt, pressed slacks, even polished my shoes, not because I thought they'd notice, but because I needed to walk in feeling whole. I stood for a second outside my car, staring at the familiar siding of the house I'd helped them finance years ago. Now it stood like a monument to decisions I wasn't part of. New paint, new patio, new family photos inside where my face had been quietly cropped out or not included at all. Callista answered the door with that too-perfect smile, the one that tightened her cheeks but never reached her eyes. Orville, she said like a neighbor greeting someone's uncle. Thanks for coming. We weren't sure you'd actually show. I handed her the wine. Figured it'd go well with whatever judgment is being served. She chuckled, but didn't deny it. Inside, the house smelled like rosemary and lemon, roast chicken. Maybe, but there were no kids running around, no toys on the floor. Where are the little ones? I asked. She barely looked up. Oh, they're at a friend's. We figured it'd be smoother this way. I knew then this wasn't brunch. It was a meeting. We sat through the meal with stiff conversation, weather, traffic, a half-hearted mention of some community event. I chewed slowly, trying to make sense of their restraint. Garrett didn't touch his second helping. His fingers drummed lightly on the edge of the table as if waiting for a signal. Then, just as Callista cleared the dishes, he stood. He didn't sit back down. I've been thinking, he began, hands clasped like some HR rep trying not to sound rehearsed. We're all under a lot of strain lately, and maybe it's time to consider a solution that works for everyone. He slid a brochure across the table. Assisted living? I asked, reading the bold print. Is this some kind of sick joke? It's not like that, Garrett said quickly. It's a place with medical access, meals, structure, peace of mind. Whose mind, exactly? Callista returned with coffee and sat, arms folded. We just want what's best, before something happens and we all end up wishing we'd stepped in. There it was, the veil lifted. This wasn't about help. It was about control. I said nothing. Not yet. As Garrett stepped away to grab something from his laptop bag, I caught a glimpse of a document inside, my name on it, bold and centered. They hadn't noticed me watching. I quietly stood, excused myself to the kitchen, then doubled back and leaned over the folder on the table. Power of attorney. Drafted. Dated. Already signed by Garrett. No conversation. No consent. I stood there frozen, piecing it all together. The brunch invite. The missing grandkids. The softened tone over the phone. They weren't planning to ask. They'd already decided. I wasn't family anymore. I was a legal inconvenience. When I returned, Garrett looked up expectantly. Thanks for the meal, I said flatly, sitting down for just a moment. The roast was solid, well seasoned. Did you get a chance to look over the brochure? I stared at him. I'll think about it. Garrett nodded like that settled it. I stood again. I've got some things to tend to. Appreciate the invite. Dad, wait. This doesn't have to be cold, he started, but I raised a hand to stop him. This isn't cold. It's clarity. And you gave it to me. Callista tried to soften her tone. We're just trying to help you age gracefully. No, I said calmly. You're trying to make sure I don't interfere. I walked out before the conversation could turn into a shouting match. I didn't owe them the energy. That night, I stood in my kitchen, holding that glossy brochure. Premium care, dignity, community, it said in cursive letters. I watched it catch fire over the stovetop burner, curling black as it disappeared. Then I opened my laptop and started a new document. The text came out of nowhere. Can we talk? Just you and me. Callista. I stared at the message longer than I care to admit. For a second, I thought maybe it was a mistake, meant for someone else. But no. My name was right there on the screen. I almost deleted it. After everything, the power of attorney scheme, the staged brunch, I had no business meeting her, and yet, something about that wording got to me. It wasn't her usual polished tone. It read like someone cracking at the seams. An hour later, I was pulling into the parking lot of a coffee shop off Division. The rain had started halfway through my drive, tapping steady against the windshield while the wipers squeaked like tired bones. My old truck rattled to a stop, and I sat for a moment, engine running, staring at the building like it held some kind of answer. Inside, I spotted her immediately. She looked older, not in the obvious way, more like someone worn thin from the inside out, the kind of tired you don't sleep off. "Thanks for coming," she said, standing just enough to be polite. I nodded, slid into the seat across from her. "Didn't come for the coffee." She let out a nervous chuckle, then looked down at her hands. No rings. I hadn't noticed before, but both her wedding band and the family heirloom ring were missing. That alone told me something big had cracked open. She started with pleasantries, how I was holding up, how the weather had been unpredictable lately, how the coffee shop's pastries weren't as good as they used to be. It was filler. Noise. I waited. Finally. She exhaled hard. "We're in trouble, Orville." I stayed quiet. Let her sit in it. "Garrett's company, the startup, it's hemorrhaging. We refinanced the house. Twice. Taxes are a year behind. And now the bank's threatening foreclosure." She pulled a folded document from her purse and laid it on the table between us. Foreclosure notice. Official. Final warning stamped in red. I didn't reach for it, just stared at her. "That power of attorney thing," she said quietly. "It wasn't just about putting you somewhere safe. It was about survival. He was going to reroute your Social Security, tap your retirement. We were desperate." I picked up my cup, gripped it so tight the ceramic creaked. My hands didn't shake, but inside, I felt something cave in. "They always looked down on me," I said, voice low. "Treated me like a relic. And all this time, they were living on sand." Callista wiped under her eye. "He didn't want to tell you. He thought you'd judge him." "He wasn't wrong," I said, flat, but she wasn't done. Her voice dropped even lower. "There's something else." I didn't answer. "He found out about the adoption." My fingers froze on the cup. I didn't breathe. "Last year, he was cleaning out the attic, looking for old tax documents. Found the file, birth certificate, hospital papers. Everything." I leaned back, letting the words sink. I begged him not to say anything, but it broke something in him. "Orville." He felt betrayed, lied to. I swallowed hard. "He was 3 months old when we brought him home. I told you. We were going to raise him like our own." "We agreed." She nodded. "We did. But he wasn't ready to know the truth. Not like that. He spiraled. I think that's when he decided he needed to take control, make his own name." I looked out the window. Rain smeared the glass like watercolor. "Maybe I shouldn't have kept it from him," I said quietly. "But I loved that boy like he was mine. I never saw him as anything else." "I know," she whispered. "But he doesn't. Not anymore." I stood without thinking. The chair creaked under me as I pushed it back. The weight of it all pressed down. Betrayal. Regret. History I couldn't rewrite. Still, I wasn't crushed. Just changed. Outside. The rain hit my face like tiny slaps of truth. I didn't run for the truck. I let it soak in. You raise someone. You build something with your bare hands. And one day, it turns on you. Not because you were wrong, but because you weren't perfect. As I reached the truck, I paused, turned back toward the cafe window. She was watching me, still seated, fingers curled around her cup, like it held the last of her dignity. I met her eyes, calm and clear. "Tell him," I said, "I'm not done." After that coffee shop meeting with Callista, I drove straight home and didn't even bother turning on the lights. I sat at the edge of my bed for what must have been an hour, listening to the house breathe. The wind creaked against the old windows. The refrigerator clicked and groaned like it had something to say. I couldn't sleep. My thoughts were coiled too tight. The next morning, I found myself in my home office, if you could even call it that. It was more a glorified storage closet with a filing cabinet, a rickety desk, and an old swivel chair that moaned every time I shifted. I hadn't stepped foot in there in months, maybe years, but now, for whatever reason, I needed to see things clearly. Strip it all down. Declutter the mess, both inside and out. I started pulling drawers, tossing out old warranties, expired insurance notices, a dusty envelope from a cruise brochure Callista had circled back in 2009. Then, buried under a folder of tax records, I saw it, a white envelope, sealed, neat handwriting on the front. Will, 2023, update. My breath stalled. I didn't remember writing it, but the signature looked like mine. Too much like mine. I slit the envelope open with my pocket knife, the edge of the blade catching just slightly like the paper didn't want to give in. The contents were formal, cold, clinical. It left everything to Garrett. Not a penny for Callista. No mention of my favorite veterans' charities. Not even the antique watch I promised to Eli. Just gone, like I never had a say. Then I checked the date at the bottom, February 14th, 2023. I sat back in my chair, heart thudding hard. That was the day after my mild stroke. I remember it clearly because I spent the entire day in a haze, drifting in and out, barely forming sentences. I couldn't have signed anything. And even if I did, it sure as hell wouldn't have looked this clean. My gut twisted. I knew who'd been on my computer that week. Garrett had come by, said he'd update my antivirus software, said he'd tidy things up on my desktop, make sure my files were secure. I didn't want to jump to conclusions. But I wasn't going to sit on this either. That afternoon, I called up Don Whitmore, a retired notary who used to hunt elk with me every fall. He now lived in a modest condo across town. We hadn't spoken in months, but I trusted him more than I trusted most people breathing. Don put on his reading glasses, tilted the page under a lamp, and ran a fingertip across the signature. "See this?" he said, tapping the T in Trask. "No stroke deviation. Pressure's uniform. That ain't natural. You saying it's forged?" He leaned back. "If I were guessing, someone traced it, or pasted a digital replica." I clenched my jaw. The insult wasn't just in the act. It was in the precision. Whoever did this had time, intent, no panic, no sloppiness, just calculated erasure. I thanked Don and left. Rain had started again. A slow drizzle. But I didn't rush. I drove to the courthouse. The place stood like it always had. Cold stone and glass. Humming with bureaucracy. I parked and walked in with the envelope in hand. At the county clerk's desk, I asked about the filing. The woman behind the counter scanned her screen. "Will dated February 14th. Yes, we have a record of that." "Who submitted it?" She hesitated. Clicked. Garrett Trask. Via electronic submission. Power of attorney was attached. I stared at her. That POA was for medical decisions only, not financial. She gave me the kind of smile people in her position give when they want to help but can't say anything else. "You may want to speak with a probate attorney, sooner rather than later." I nodded, stepped out into the rain. The world had shifted. Again, every safeguard I thought protected me had a crack. And Garrett? He didn't just try to control my future, he tried to erase my past, rewrite who I was and what I stood for. I didn't go home right away. I sat in the truck, windows fogging. I stared at the courthouse steps, wondering how many other folks had walked out of there just like me, stunned, gutted, furious. What does a man leave behind if not even his own wishes are honored? I thought about burning the envelope, starting from scratch. But that's not who I am. I've spent too long being reactive. It was time to take a different path. I pulled out my phone, scrolled until I found the number I hadn't dialed in over a decade. No name attached, just W, Done. Typed out a message. Still got your license. I need to dig something up. Stan was already seated in the booth when I walked into the old roadside diner just north of Spokane. The place hadn't changed since 1985. Same checkered floor, same chipped formica tables, same waitress pouring stale coffee like she was clocking a union job. I slid into the booth across from him, nodding instead of speaking. No need for small talk. He already had the file on the table, thick and worn like it had been handled too many times. I figured you'd want to see this for yourself, he said, tapping the manila folder. I opened it. The first page was a printout of bank statements. Oakbridge Solutions, LLC. I'd never heard of it, but the mailing address hit me like a slap. It was tied to a property I'd bought 20 years ago and let Callista manage. I flipped through more pages. Deposit logs, withdrawal slips, dates lined up clean and precise, right alongside the months my retirement account had mysteriously shrunk. Stan leaned back, arms crossed. He's been feeding that account 5 years strong. You weren't supposed to find this. The numbers felt cold in my hands. $326. $400 siphoned out over time. Quiet theft. Not a smash and grab, but a slow bleed. I didn't speak, didn't blink, just stared at Garrett's name on one of the authorizations. I could almost hear his voice in my head, that smug tone. It's all under control, Dad. Stan cleared his throat. This is embezzlement. Plain and simple. You want to go to the cops? I shook my head slowly. Not yet. Legal's too neat. He was ready for that. I want him to lose the one thing he never expected to. His name. Stan whistled low. You're serious. Dead. The silence between us thickened. Coffee went cold. Neither of us touched the eggs. I tucked the folder back into my coat. Stood up. Thanks, Stan. I owe you more than breakfast. As I left the diner, I could feel the shift inside me. Garrett hadn't just crossed a line. He'd erased it and drawn a new one in permanent ink. But I still had my eraser, and I planned to use it. Back home, I called Cynthia Lane. She picked up on the second ring. Well, Orville Trask, she said. Didn't expect to hear from you unless I dropped dead. Still breathing, I said. But I need a new will. She paused. I take it this has something to do with your son? Everything, I replied. Meet me tomorrow, and bring your meanest pen. The next morning, we met in her home office. She had her reading glasses on. Legal pads spread out like a battlefield. I dictated every word, left nothing to Callista, nothing to Garrett, not a nickel. Instead, every cent would go to a scholarship fund in my wife's name. Something real, something enduring. Cynthia raised an eyebrow. You sure about this? I nodded. They've been counting on me to stay soft. That ended yesterday. She drafted it fast, clean, ironclad. I signed with a hand that didn't tremble. She sealed the envelope. You want to mail it or hand deliver? I smiled. Actually, I've got something better. I pulled out another envelope, this one addressed to Garrett. Inside. One sentence. I took your lessons to heart. You taught me not to trust anyone. That afternoon, I cut off access to the bank accounts, changed passwords, killed all lines of communication. I didn't answer texts, let calls ring until voicemail took them. 3 days in, he finally broke. Dad. His message started, strained and shaky. We need to talk. This isn't how families handle things. I didn't respond, just saved the voicemail in a folder marked insurance. There's a strange peace in silence. When I was younger, it was punishment. Now, it was a blade I wielded without lifting a hand. Late that evening, I sat by the window with a cup of black coffee, steam rising like smoke from a barrel. The sun cracked the horizon, painting light across the stamped envelope on my desk, addressed to the IRS Fraud Division. Inside, ledgers from Oakbridge Solutions. Garrett wanted power. He's about to learn what it feels like to lose it. Stan called first thing in the morning. Just one line. He got the letter. That was all I needed to hear. The IRS packet had landed exactly where it was supposed to. Within hours, Garrett's entire operation started to unravel. Stan had eyes in places I didn't ask too much about. Old favors from his PI days. Through those back channels, He fed me updates like clockwork. 2 withdrawals this morning, both flagged and blocked. He tried moving funds from 3 different accounts, all tied to Oakbridge. I poured myself a cup of coffee and listened. Silent. A man once so loud in my life now sounded like background static. Later that afternoon, Cynthia called. Garrett's lawyer reached out, she said, her voice crisp, professional. They're panicking. Threats, questions, desperate offers. They know the IRS is circling. I said nothing at first, just let the silence settle. Then I told her calmly, he once told me to get off my ass and do something useful. Guess I finally did. She chuckled softly, but there was no warmth. You want me to meet them? No, I said. If he wants closure, he can find it in court. A few days passed. More updates came and went. Cynthia finalized the trust papers. Every cent I had left, plus the house and land, were redirected into the Trask Foundation for Elder Mental Wellness. The name was my idea. Subtle enough. Targeted enough. The press release dropped on a Thursday. Local paper first, then radio picked it up. Suddenly, the same neighbors who'd once whispered about my decline were quoting my philanthropic vision. People I hadn't seen in a decade were sending letters, handwritten ones, real ones, thanking me for making a difference. Cynthia arranged a short interview with a local reporter. I kept it short, to the point. I'm just an old man who had the means and the time to give something back, I said. My son chose his path. I chose mine. That line made the headline, but what didn't make it to print was what I told the reporter when the recorder was off. I didn't win because I ruined him. I won because I didn't let him ruin me. Weeks later, I got a letter. No return address. But I recognized the handwriting immediately. Angular. Precise. Like he was always carving something instead of writing it. Inside was a single page. No apology. No remorse. Just bile in ink. You took everything from me, it read. That line stuck with me. Not because it hurt, but because it told the whole story. He never saw any of it as mine to begin with. Just a life to inherit, a throne to take. I didn't reply. I didn't call. I took the letter out back, stood over the fire pit, and watched it burn slow. The smell of ash mixed with marigolds. My wife used to plant them there. Said they were cheerful fighters. I believed her. I sat in the old patio chair with a cup of chamomile tea, watching the breeze ripple through the yard. That same backyard once held birthday parties, summer barbecues, and Garrett's first football. Now it was just quiet, not empty, just clean. I remembered Garrett at 5, sobbing over a broken toy truck, looking at me like I was the whole damn world. Back then, I thought that love would hold, that being needed was enough. But sometimes, the story doesn't end in redemption. Sometimes, it ends with the door closed gently. No fireworks. I'd reclaimed something far more important than money. I'd taken back my name, my choices, my voice. Let the next chapter come. A knock echoed through the house. Steady. Light. I stood, set the mug down, and opened the door. A young woman stood there, maybe mid-20s, nervous, holding a manila folder. "Mr. Trask?" she asked, voice trembling. "I think I might be your granddaughter." I stood in the doorway for a few seconds longer than I should have, the weight of her words hanging there between us like thick fog. She looked young, early 20s, maybe, but there was something in her posture, the way she clutched that folder to her chest, like it was armor, that told me she hadn't had an easy road. "I'm Emily," she repeated softly. "Emily Mason, I think you knew my mother, Melissa." That name. I hadn't heard it spoken aloud in over 2 decades. My fingers lost their grip on the coffee mug I'd been holding, and it slipped, shattering against the hardwood floor behind me. "Melissa." I stepped aside, gesturing with a nod. "Come in." She moved hesitantly past me, her eyes flicking toward the broken mug but saying nothing. I closed the door gently, the soft click sounding louder than it should have. We walked into the living room, sunlight slanting through the blinds, dust dancing like memories in the air. She sat on the edge of the couch, still gripping that manila folder like it held the truth of the world. I took my usual spot in the armchair across from her. "I'm sorry to just show up," she said, "but I didn't know who else to ask. I found this after my mom passed." She opened the folder, laying its contents across the coffee table one by one. A worn photo of Melissa, probably in her mid-20s, smiling in front of some fairground booth, a birth certificate, and an envelope addressed simply to OT. I leaned forward, heart thudding. The letter inside was short, Melissa's handwriting. She'd written it after we stopped seeing each other, never sent it. In it, she talked about the time we shared, about finding out she was pregnant, about deciding not to tell me. "I didn't want to burden you," she wrote. "You'd just lost so much. I thought maybe letting you go was the kindest thing I could do." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. My eyes stayed locked on the letter while my thoughts scattered like dry leaves in the wind. Emily cleared her throat gently. "She told me about you, just before she passed. Cancer. It spread fast. Her last week. She said your name like it was both a memory and a regret." I looked up at her then. Really looked. Her eyes. There was something in them. Not just color or shape. Something behind them. A guarded kindness. Familiar. "I'm not here for anything," she said, almost apologetically. "I don't want money or some kind of claim. I just wanted to know where I came from." Her voice cracked at the edges, but she held steady. I stood and walked toward the hallway, then into the garage. The air was cooler there, heavy with dust and time. I pulled down an old box from the shelf, flipped it open. Inside were yellowed newspaper clippings, old birthday cards, and at the bottom, a photo album. Near the back, I found it, a grainy snapshot of Melissa at a community fundraiser. Arms crossed, half smile on her face. My hands trembled slightly. When I returned to the living room, Emily was staring at a marigold plant on the windowsill. "My mom used to plant those," she said softly. "Every spring." I gave her the photo, and she studied it like it was a map. We sat in silence for a while. Not awkward, just full, like there was too much to say and no rush to say it. "I have a lot of old paperwork," I said eventually. "Stuff I've been meaning to sort. You any good at organizing?" She smiled for the first time. "Actually, yeah, I'm studying social work. I help out at a memory care center sometimes." "Well," I said, rising slowly, "maybe Sunday afternoon, if you're free?" "I'd like that," she said, standing too. "Thank you, Mr. Trask." "Call me Orville," I replied. "Or maybe just Grandpa someday." She smiled again, wider this time, and walked to the door. I watched her disappear down the street, sunlight catching the edges of her hair. For the first time in a long while, I felt something more than peace. I felt possibility. The phone rang just as I turned away. Blocked number. I almost let it go. Then I picked up. "Mr. Trask," a gravelly voice said. "We need to talk. It's about your son." The phone buzzed once more in my hand. Still sitting on the porch after Emily left. I stared at the screen. No number. Just blocked caller. Something about the silence between rings told me this wasn't telemarketing. I answered without a word. A gravel-thick voice said, "Mr. Trask, you don't know me, but I've been working for you, quietly." I didn't flinch. "Go on." "I'm the PI your lawyer hired months ago, after that family dinner. We have reason to believe your son Garrett's been preparing to declare you mentally unfit, petitioning for full control of your estate, home, and remaining assets. He's moved fast, filing drafts, reaching out to doctors behind your back, but we got everything recorded." I let the wind rustle through the line. I figured as much when my medical records started showing up with evaluations I never agreed to. "You already suspected?" I smiled, more tired than surprised. I've played poker with better liars than my son, and just like that, the pieces clicked. The missing mail, The strange calls from the bank. Garrett's suddenly concerned tone last week, asking about my future wishes. He wasn't checking in, he was checking boxes, but he didn't know I'd had my own cards tucked under the table. 3 months earlier, after Garrett's little tirade at dinner, I'd driven out to a small law office just past Route 12. Tucked between a tractor supply store and a closed-down diner sat DeWitt's Sons, a place nobody with ambition would think to look. "Orville," DeWitt greeted me, shaking my hand firmly. "I was wondering when you'd come." We got to work fast, transferred all remaining property into a trust, ironclad and untouchable, updated my will, filed documents verifying my full mental competence, signed off by a licensed physician I trusted, and cameras. That was my idea. After Garrett's last surprise visit, I had a few discreet ones installed: living room, den, even the study drawer he thought was still locked. I let him search, I let him scheme, but I made sure every word, every paper he tried to sneak a photo of was caught. A week ago, I sat Emily down, told her she'd need to stay clear of what was coming. "But I want to help," she'd said. "You will, just not yet," I told her. "This ain't gonna be clean." The town hall meeting was packed. Garrett stood at the podium in a pressed suit, voice laced with performative concern. "My father, as many of you know, has been showing signs of cognitive decline. I only want what's best. Legal guardianship would ensure his well-being and protect his estate from mishandling." Gasps murmured through the room. And then, the door creaked open. I stepped in, cane tapping steadily, with Mr. DeWitt at my side, followed by 2 state investigators and Dr. Robbins, my physician. Garrett froze mid-sentence. I kept my voice even. "Before this circus goes on, I believe there's something the council needs to hear." DeWitt handed over a flash drive. The recording played through the speakers. Garrett's voice echoed across the room. "Once the doctor signs off, it's mine. The house. The account. He won't know what hit him." The silence was brutal. Then DeWitt pulled out the last card. "This is the legal severance. Garrett Trask has been removed from Mr. Orville Trask's estate, permanently, effective immediately." I turned to him. "You called me a burden. I just made sure I'm not your problem, or your payday." He didn't speak. Couldn't. Security stepped in, flanking him, as the council quietly nodded. Outside, the sun felt different. Not warmer, just clearer. I sat down on the park bench, the same one I used to feed pigeons from. Emily approached, breath hitching. "I watched the stream," she whispered. I nodded, patting the seat beside me. She sat down slowly, wiping under her glasses. I didn't expect it to end like that. Me neither. But that's the thing about justice. Sometimes it waits. Sometimes it needs help. We sat in silence. Not the hollow kind. The full kind. A breeze brushed the marigolds nearby. They bloomed strong this year. Emily reached into her bag. "Dad, this came yesterday." She handed me a letter. The return address made my jaw tighten. My ex-wife.